Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality.
Hello and welcome to what is, believe it or not, the 100th episode of the Living Out podcast. And that might be a surprise to you. It's certainly a surprise to me. If you'd seen the scenes on this recording session just a few minutes ago, you'd be surprised that we'd ever made it to 100 episodes. Andy Robinson's pop shield had broken. I was entangled in multiple wires. Andrew Bunt was struggling to find or make his recording device work. In fact, Ashley's basically the only person that's looked relatively capable for the last 5 or 10 minutes. But anyway, welcome to the 100th podcast. It is amazing that we've made it this far, particularly bearing in mind that certainly Andy and myself are absolute technophobes. But we're here, and that is Ashley, Andy, Andrew and myself, to celebrate the fact that we have, in God's grace, despite our failures with technology, made it to 100 episodes of this podcast. And my fellow guests are here to provide amusement, as ever, in our technophobe abilities, but also to share their most memorable moments from the previous 100 episodes, in the hope that there have been one or two. Certainly the last 5 or 10 minutes has certainly been one of mine. But anyway, who's willing to go with your most memorable moment from the last 100 episodes before we turn to this latest episode? Ashley, do you want to start?
Why not? I'm actually going to do two and be cheeky because I can. So the first was the moment, I think it must have been in the Youth Leaders Crash Course series, and the Emerging Generations team had taken over for that series. So there was a moment in that series where the term submerging generations was coined, I believe by you, Mr. Shaw. And it's just provided great hilarity on many occasions moving forwards. So that's definitely one. And then the other, slightly more serious, was in the Plausibility Problem series, episode 9 of that, the Suffering is to be Avoided misstep. It was the last one of that series. And Adam Curtis was in that one, and he was reflecting on how we can navigate suffering as Christians. And one of his tips was to journal. So he uses that to help him gain perspective on things. It's just a really helpful tool. And I journal as well, so I found that very useful. He had some really helpful questions that he asks himself, which I've used to great benefit myself since then. So I'll definitely go and have a listen to what he says in that one. It's a way of being honest with God, being honest with yourself about what hurts when you're going through suffering, confessing anything that needs confessing, and then just dwelling on eternal truths, and all of that just dramatically transforms, as Adam said, dramatically transforms your perspective on things. And I have found that it's just a really helpful tool. Enables me to walk through life with a joy and a contentment, even in suffering, just working through that process. So that's a memorable moment for me. And it was a gift that kept on giving, partly because, as I said, his suggestions have been helpful directly to me, but also partly because I told Adam how helpful that episode was for me. And he then recommended me a book, which I will now commend to all of you. I bought 5 or 6 copies for all of my closest friends, so really enjoyed it. Imperfect Reflections by Kirsten Burkett. It's all about journaling as a Christian. Really good book. The end.
Wow. Okay, so we had both a comic and a serious moment in answer to that question. I don't know if we're going to have a similar sort of approach from Andrew.
Yes, we are. My favourite memory is, I've talked about, I think, the podcast before, but alas, I think no listener will ever have heard. It is still the dummy episode that Ed and Anne I recorded. I think way back in the depths of lockdown in, I don't know, mid-2020, or maybe late 2020, where basically Anne and I enjoyed a conversation about trains and musicals, which then led on to talk of Thomas the Tank Engine, the musical, and what could have been, but alas wasn't, because that was almost made, but then wasn't. So I still hope and pray that one day our dear listeners will get the joy and privilege of listening to that episode from the end of 2020, I think it was.
That is a thought. Well, actually, it gives an opportunity to pay tribute to Anne, who
Yes.
we wouldn't be having 100 episodes were it not for Anne getting us into podcasting in the first place, although some of us are grateful that we've never had that original episode going live. Anything more serious and profound than that?
Well, yeah, my stand-up moment actually is from an episode which I think is only a couple before this. Ashley and I were talking with Catherine Brown in our friendship series, current series, which I think has been a real blessing to many people. And she made this comment of how easy it is for friendships to become sitting around talking about life and neither actually doing life together and not making memories. And for me, it was just one of those light bulb moments of suddenly realizing that describes the majority of my friendships. And that's actually the root of a lot of some of the problems in my friendships, actually, that it's easy to sit around talking about life and not to actually get out and make some memories. And it was such a simple but profound thing. And such a light bulb moment of this could be incredibly helpful if I actually take this on board and do something about this. And so very recent, but that was for me just something that for weeks now I've been kind of musing on that and trying to begin to put that into practice, which is a nugget of wisdom that I found really, really helpful.
Thank you, Andrew. Andy?
Yeah, so the humorous one was memories of one of the few times when we all got together to record in person. Most of the time we're remote. We got together in Bristol in the midst of one of the worst storms there've been for several years. So I remember recording it and all of us thinking, is this going to be remotely useful? Are we just going to have sort of windows clattering in the background? And I think I was presenting, and so I had to sort of record an apology in case nobody could hear what we were saying, in case we needed to use it. But so I do have fun memories of that day. But I think more seriously, I just love the fact that this exists, actually. So, I think back to life as a 17-year-old, knew I was experiencing same-sex attraction, didn't realise anybody else did. And I just think what this would have meant to me, actually, thinking of the various, stories from so many different people across the series that we've heard from. I'm just thrilled this exists, actually. Obviously, sometimes there are limits to the amount of wisdom shared, but just hopefully hearing from people who are in similar experiences, maybe blessing 17, 27, 37, 47-year-olds around the place, and I'm just so thankful for that.
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it, to both as friends have these conversations, which actually is us hanging out together and commenting on life, but actually, obviously, the great benefit we have is that we're doing this together, and it's just a great privilege to be having conversations with you guys, and then to be sharing those conversations with others. And then what I love, and I think a particular highlight for me, is when I've been speaking at events or meeting people for the very first time, and they talk about the podcast and they join in the conversation and they say, "I really love it when ... or my favourite episode is ... or could you do something on?" And I love the community we've built up around this podcast, as well as the events and the website and the other things we do. Oh, well, we could go on, but to mark our 100th episode, we want to give one of you lovely listeners a gift. We're charities, we can't give you all gifts, but we want to give one of you a gift. And to do that, you have to enter a draw. And if you enter the draw and you win, the exciting prize is a copy of all our books. Now, this, just to be clear, is not all the books we possess, because you're not getting your hands on those. And to be honest, you wouldn't want to win them all. It's all the books we've written, plus a pair of Bluetooth headphones to increase your enjoyment when listening to our podcast. Now, can I just say, I am recording this podcast having to lean my ears at a particular angle, because the wire to these headphones are so caught up in all the other recording equipment I've got here that actually the thought of winning a Bluetooth headphone is exactly what I like, because I've got a crick in my neck because I'm actually having to do it at this angle. So anyway, the prize I'm going to be entering, although I probably can't enter, can I?
You can't
enter. Oh, no. So anyway,
the Living Out podcast scandal. Ed wins the draw.
The lucky person who enters this draw, you'll win all our books, plus a pair of Bluetooth headphones that I really want but can't get. That is a prize worth having. When entering the draw, you'll also have the chance to submit questions for the next series of the podcast, subjects we haven't covered, tricky questions you want answers to, and indeed silly starter questions to keep us going, because we really are scraping the barrel ourselves. So, multiple reasons to enter this draw. There's the prizes, the books, the headphones, but most of all, the chance to reflect or to influence the next 100 episodes of the Living Out podcasts. To submit your questions, to enter that draw, you need to go to livingout.org/100, and the draw closes on the 10th of April. I think that is more than enough celebration of our 100th episode. You've now got the opportunity to join a new episode, which will be starting with the dulcet tones of Andy Robinson now.
Hello and welcome to the Living Out podcast. My name's Andy Robinson, and you join us as part of our series in friendship. Obviously, for those of us who experience same-sex attraction, friendship ends up being quite important. But our hope is that this series will be useful for all of us, whatever our situation. And I'm delighted to be joined by Ed today. How are you doing, Ed?
I am doing okay. I nearly fell asleep in the meeting I was in beforehand, but I think I'm a little bit more awake now.
Excellent. We shall see. And it's great to have John Wyatt with us. John, you have the task of trying to keep Ed awake for the rest of the podcast. John, I know, has recently written on the theme of friendship, and we're looking forward to getting into that. But John, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit first? Perhaps tell us something of the way in which you've used your life and so on. I'm sure that's not going to be easy to do briefly, but have a go.
Yeah, thanks very much. No, it's really good to be here and to talk about a subject which is very close to my heart. And my background is basically as a medic. I spent most of my life working professionally as a medic and also then increasingly into medical ethics. But throughout really all my time from adulthood, I've had the privilege of some really profound, deep friendships which have really influenced me and been an enormous source of love and support. And one in particular with John Stott, a very well-known Christian leader, preacher, teacher, who I first got to know him as a friend when I was a lowly medical student in London. And that friendship made a huge impact on my life, transformed my future in many ways. And I felt I really wanted to tell that story, which is why eventually I wrote the book Transforming Friendship, both to talk about my friendship with Stott, but also my passionate concern that healthy and gospel-shaped friendships should be encouraged and supported.
That's wonderful, John. Thank you so much. And we're going to get into the theme of the book next.
John, thank you so much for coming to talk about the book Transforming Friendship, Lessons from John Stott and Others, which is published by IVP here in the UK. My friend, Vaughan Roberts, basically just told me I had to read this book, I think soon after its publication, and I took it away on holiday and consumed it very quickly and then passed it on to my mum, who was sitting next to me on the beach, and she read it very quickly as well. And what was so helpful for me was somebody just speaking about and speaking openly and honestly about a positive vision for intergenerational friendships, because within a lot of church circles, including a lot of evangelical church circles, intergenerational friendships or intergenerational discipleship relationships have been sadly the context for a lot of abuse to happen. And I think because of those, having sought to disciple younger Christians for much of my sort of working life as a pastor, had sort of basically pulled back from that sort of ministry, pulled back from that sort of discipleship through friendship because it had gone wrong. And what was so transformative about Transforming Friendship as a book was just learning from a positive example of friendship combined with a desire to sort of help somebody grow as a Christian, to mutually help each other grow as a Christian. And just reading this book basically made me think something that couldn't happen anymore because it had gone so wrong actually could happen if we got a better vision for what a healthy friendship looks like, what an unhealthy friendship looks like. That's a bit of a garbled intro to all of that. Tell us about your friendship with John Stott, and particularly what was so healthy about it.
Yeah, so I was astonished when I was just a second-year medical student to receive an invitation. I was going to the same church. He was the rector. But he said, would you like to come and have a cup of coffee with me? And it subsequently became apparent that he was deliberately, intentionally striking up a friendship with me, as he did with many young people, male and female, both in London and across the world. And it was an extraordinary experience for me because it rapidly became apparent that he didn't have some kind of program that he was trying to enact. It wasn't, would you like to read Romans with me, or something equally daunting. But it was much more. He was just gently and courteously showing his interest and concern for me as a person. And as our friendship grew, it became apparent that he was willing to share himself, his own heart, his vision, his concerns, even his vulnerabilities.
And I think that was so helpful for me because I think, again, and we've chatted about this in some other context, about often people talk about mentoring and discipleship, and people are used to that in the context of the church. But the fact that he was more simply just saying, in effect, let's be friends, it just seemed to be so refreshing. And the fact that his agenda was just to get to know you and be a good friend, again, was something quite fresh and distinctive, because I think a lot of these relationships end up being a sort of more, if I can put it, clinical. I'm going to spend a year helping you become more like Jesus, and then I'm going to sort of dump you. Actually, he seemed to say, I just want to be your friend, and it's going to be a long-term thing.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think, unfortunately, this sort of transactional model of relationships is often, what is seen as how relationships between older and younger friends and Christian friends should be. And in fact, that whole concept of mentoring, I mean, people have different understandings of that word, but if you go back to its origins, it's very much a business transactional relationship. It's hierarchical, it's time limited, it's boundaried, it's very much one way. I'm the mentor, you're the mentee. Whereas it seems to me that the model of friendship that Stott was offering was all the opposites of those. It wasn't transactional. It was concerned about the heart, not about the activities. It was mutually sharing, and he was learning from us, the young people he invested in, as much as we were learning from him. Well, I'm sure we were learning much more, but nonetheless, he was opening himself up, genuinely curious to know what it was like to be us. And to have our perspectives and live in our world, and it was an issue of mutual support and encouragement, rather than this transactional. The purpose is to make you a better Christian, and I'm going to do it in this way.
One of the things you talk about in the book is that as you've read of similar, sort of in some ways similar relationship between older Christian leaders and younger Christian men, one of the things you've sort of done is gone back over your friendship with John Stott and thought, actually, was there anything unhealthy about it? What are the things that have reassured you that it was a really healthy friendship, both at the time and since, that make you think, yes, this was just genuine friendship rather than that transactional side of things?
Yeah, so I'd had this idea of trying to tell the story of the friendship with John Stott for many years, and it was slowly sort of getting round to it and making some notes and so on. And it was really at that time that a whole series of scandals started erupting into the church, of which we know we're very well known, involving very prominent, well-recognised Christian leaders, almost all exclusively men, charming, highly revered, and yet subsequently turning out to be involved in an extraordinary level of abusive and damaging behaviour, particularly with younger people. So, as all that broke, I was thinking, good grief, can I really tell the story about Stott? And is it possible that he too is one of these hypocritical, coercive, was he manipulating us? He was certainly extremely powerful and revered, very able, very charming, and so inevitably I and all the close friends of Stott, we've gone back into our memories and thought, is it possible that we were being deceived and that he was abusing us? But actually, to my great joy, I can honestly say that I can't think of a single incident in a friendship which lasted over 30 years when I felt that he was inappropriately trying to manipulate or abuse me. In fact, when I look back, I can see now that he intuited the risk. The greater the power imbalance in a relationship, the greater the risk of some kind of manipulation, of some kind of coercive control. And in retrospect, I can see that Stott was often bending over backwards to avoid that. And so sometimes when I and others asked him for specific advice, do you think I should do this? Or do you think I should do that? He would say something like, well, I really don't think it's for me, dear brother, to tell you what you must do, but you should think about these principles, and then you really should pray that God would lead you to make the right decision. So he was certainly not applying great manipulative pressure. And I think he intuited the risks. I mean, even though the scandals hadn't broken at all by that stage.
So moving on from the risks of intergenerational friendships and the way in which John Stott ensured that wasn't a danger. What were the perceptions of the sort of benefits of just spending time with somebody a generation older, and how have you seen that in other friendships as well?
Yeah, well, I think the truth is that this has always been a central part of following Christ for 2,000 years. For the Christian church, it's us who suddenly say, hang on a minute, there's something a bit weird about an older guy spending time with a younger person. Other generations of the Christian church would think that that was bizarre. I mean, going all the way back to, the relationship of Jesus with the beloved disciple, the relationship of Paul with Timothy, and you think of all the friendships that Paul had as well, not just with Timothy, but with Titus and with Onesimus, the runaway slave, and the warmth of the relationships that he has. So that these kind of intergenerational friendships, I think, are a foundation, ought to be a foundation of the way that we live as a community. I mean, I grew up in a very fundamentalist version of the Christian Brethren, and one of the features of the Christian Brethren, as they were particularly in our group, was that I grew up with lots of aunties and uncles, older people who were in the assembly and who clearly took a great deal of interest and loving care in me and in with the other younger people within the assembly. And we used to go off, and they would ply me with cakes and invite me to do this, that and the other, and I thought it was perfectly ordinary, normal to have these, many of them single, elderly people, both male and female, who were taking a kind of paternal or maternal interest in me, and so I've benefited enormously from the wisdom and the life experiences of sharing with older people as a young person. And there's a beautiful quote that I came across that says, intergenerational friendship is like an exercise in time travel. I'm learning to see the world through the eyes of another time, and that person is learning to see the world through my eyes. And together we are upbuilding and learning and growing as individuals.
Now that you are an older man, if I can put it like that, John, you saw John Stott go through the aging process and really struggle with that, and struggle with his capacity diminishing and his ministry coming to an end. What have you now, as you go through that stage you saw him go through, how are you feeling the benefit?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I can remember Stott sort of, sometimes with quite urgency, saying, look, I've done my best to pass this on to you. Now it's your turn. Now it's your turn to make this real and to pass it on to others. And he clearly felt that with a growing sense of urgency as he aged. And the truth is, I feel exactly the same now. As I feel that I'm coming to the end. I'm in my early 70s. I'm living on borrowed time. And I feel a growing sense of urgency to try and pass it on and to try and commission the next generation, particularly of Christian medics, of people who are interested and involved in medical ethics and so on. I'm coming to the end of my ministry. It's really important for me to communicate to you what I've learned and to encourage you to take on the baton, and passing on that baton and how we do that and passing it on well is such an important concept.
What are the opportunities you get to do that at the moment?
Well, I'm praying and that God would lead me to younger people who are hungry, who are interested, and who I can invest in. And so, I think I probably could name 8, 10, 12 younger individuals who I am consciously wanting to meet up with from time to time, and we'd like to have a cup of coffee. How can I pray for you? What are you reading at the moment? Tell me what's the biggest issue that you're facing, and let's talk about it. And then, as appropriate, I can share some of my insights, struggles, questions, and so on. And to be honest, it's a great joy. It's something I really look forward to, just to be able to spend that time with someone, knowing that we have shared interests, knowing that we can learn from one another.
And just as you just reeled through those questions just now, I think you also talk about them in the book. I think they're just beautiful questions that can just be a wonderful way of just saying to people, do you want to have a coffee, and then just actually genuinely getting to know them and building a friendship. Just thought, if people are wondering how you do that, just those questions you mentioned, particularly that one about, what's the big issue that you're facing in life at the moment. And I think, actually so many of us would love the opportunity to talk with someone who was a friend about that, because we've all got big issues, and actually very rarely do we have the opportunity to sit down with anybody, let alone an older, wiser friend, and actually just share that. So I just think those particular questions as a way of just beginning the conversation are just gold dust.
And I think the other thing is, one, that we saturated in prayer. It was amazing how Stott used to, live out the reality of prayer. So that he had this astonishing memory for details. You told me last year, I remember 3 months ago, you told me X, Y, Z, and I think, how did you remember that? But it was probably because he'd been praying about it. But I think another important idea is that when it feels safe and appropriate, we as the older, more powerful person can actually make ourselves vulnerable. I went through a very deep and dark period of psychiatric illness some time ago, and I found, and still have from time to time, issues to do with mental health and mood disturbance and so on. And when it seems appropriate, I've found that just to share a bit of that, of my own struggles, and you can see sometimes people look a bit, they come to talk to the professor. I didn't expect to start talking about mental health issues. But what it does is it's giving the other person permission to share their own vulnerabilities, that we're in this together. And I've learnt now as an older Christian that actually it's not particularly helpful for me to go and talk about all the wonderful things, quotes, that I may have done with my life or not, as the case may be. But it's not the triumphs and the all the books you've written that people are interested in. Actually, what's most helpful is to talk about the failures. It's to talk about, I really, looking back, I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I'd known this. That was clearly a bad mistake. And the reason I'm sharing this is just so that you can learn from it.
John, it is a fantastic book. I found it really helpful, and it's massively challenged me to make sure that I'm investing in intergenerational friendships. I think one of the things I can remember, actually, John Stott, I think, talks about in one of his commentaries to the Pastoral Epistles about how when he was first preaching on Timothy, he felt he was the Timothy, but when he wrote his later stuff, he felt a little bit more like the Paul speaking to the Timothy. And I think just that dynamic of making sure that we perhaps do have people older friends who can prepare us for what's coming, but also once we've become as middle-aged and Andy as myself have become, actually thinking, who are the Timothys that we can be investing in and being just good friends with more than anything else.
There's a nice quote, isn't there? Everybody needs a Paul, a Barnabas, and a Timothy. And I think that does actually encompass something very profound.
Yeah, in fact, so profound that I've made that one of my objectives. It's one of my objectives for my job at Emmanuel Bristol is that phrase is in it because it so struck me.
I hope you're enjoying Living Out's 100th podcast episode. Once you've listened to this one, why not check out some of our 99 previous episodes? If you like hearing people's stories, have a listen to one of our Meet the Authors series or our recent series sharing different stories. If you or those around you are asking tricky questions, then our Explore series or the tantalisingly named Questions No One Wants to Answer series might be the ones for you. If you're a church leader or a youth leader, head for our series designed specifically for you and have a listen as well to the series on what a biblically inclusive church looks like. And if you're a book fan, you might enjoy the series working through Ed's book, The Plausibility Problem, or indeed our short series on particularly encouraging passages from the best book of all, the Bible. You'll find all of these and more on whatever platform you're currently listening on. I hope you enjoy exploring all 100 of our episodes.
Well, Ed's just mentioned that he and I are approaching middle age is the way I like to put it. That might be quite generous, but we are the two oldest members of the Living Out speaking team. And if I can put this politely, John has got 1 or 2 more years on us as well. So it felt like we were the right group to talk about how friendship had differed at different stages of life. So Ed, let me start with you, actually. How would you say friendship has differed at the different stages you've gone through?
The big thing I noticed was that at university, friendships happened without almost any effort because you were there, you were studying alongside and living alongside contemporaries. You thought you were very busy, but you weren't. You had loads of time, and friendships just happened without trying. I moved to Bristol in my early 20s. People were beginning to sort of pair off. But again, we just all had quite a lot of time to serve alongside each other in ministry at church and on summer camps, and friendships just, again, continued to happen almost without much effort. And then suddenly, I think towards the end of my 20s into my 30s, everybody had not just got married off, but they started to have kids. And friendship which basically suddenly had to plan it. Well, I didn't realize you suddenly had to plan it. I thought it would continue to be effortless. And it would just happen, and I wouldn't need to do things like get dates in the diary or plan things. But suddenly, that's what needed to be done, and you had to be so intentional. And it took me quite a while to work out, because I'm not particularly bright, how we'd move from the effortless stage into, if you want to continue to be friends with these people, you and they're going to have to make a lot of an effort. So I think that's one of the big changes I've noticed, and it took me a while to notice it. And I had quite a painful spot or time, I think probably towards the end of my 20s and 30s, as I realised, I had to make an effort.
I think this is one of the things, I think there's just a big difference between men and women as a sort of general stereotype. You know, when I watch my wife and other older women, I can see that many of them just quite unconsciously are constantly reaching out, nurturing, supporting friendships, just sending a text, making a comment, let's meet up, whereas I think for men, for many of us, it doesn't come as naturally as that. And therefore, we have got to be much more intentional. And in particular, building the depth. I think that it's perfectly possible for men, isn't it, to have a kind of hail fellow, well met, knock you on the shoulder, but really there isn't any kind of real depth and vulnerability. And I think the interesting thing about friendship is it does depend on a certain chemistry. We all know that there are some people who we ought to be really close friends to, and for whatever reason it just doesn't happen. And yet this other person who seems so different and completely different personality, different culture, different background, whatever, we just feel drawn to them. There's some kind of chemistry there. And I think, therefore, we should follow our instincts in the sense of being drawn to someone, but saying, look, how can we invest in this? Would you be... And I think that means we have to take the risk of taking the initiative. It's a bit like asking someone on a date. I mean, it's not at all like asking someone on a date, okay?
No.
But there's a bit like you have to face the rejection. Oh, well, I'm terribly sorry. I'm really busy, and, okay, I get the message, Whereas you get someone who says, oh, yeah, that'd be great. Let's do it.
I was struck, I mean, again, it's what John Stott did, would you like to have a cup of coffee with me? It's just such a... I feel at one level it feels like a sort of risky thing to do, and yet so often it will be something like that opens up friendships. It was quite recently actually with somebody at church. I thought, I suspect we have similar interests and would get on. We only had sort of done 2-minute hellos in church, and it was, should we grab a lunch together sometime? And actually, over the last 6 months, that's been a friendship, again, actually intergenerational, but has, I think, been an encouragement to both of us. But it was that initial, does that sound a bit weird? But actually I think it's been hugely helpful.
And I think that's a real problem with our culture now, isn't it? It's this hermeneutic of suspicion.
Yeah.
That immediately, what's the deal? Either it's sex or it's some kind of coercive, controlling, manipulative power play. The idea that you could just have a healthy friendship which is gospel-centered and an expression of Christian love it has become clouded with this and I think it's just really sad that so many people are so worried about the hermeneutic of suspicion that they think it's the safest thing to do is just keep yourself to yourself.
And I think that's particularly a problem for same-sex attracted people, because the hermeneutic of suspicion can mean, if I'm speaking to another man, there must be something sexual in it, when it very rarely is at all. Or I can't speak to another one because that's then breaking other rules. And so the danger is if you allow the hermeneutic of suspicion to rule, same-sex attracted people are going to be completely isolated, because you can't be in a good friendship with another man because it's, if you're a same-sex attracted man, because that's dodgy. And then also you're breaking some of the subcultural laws about, for instance, going out for a coffee with a single woman. What idea are you giving her or other people? And if you allow the hermeneutic of suspicion to completely rule, you will become completely alone. And I've certainly found that I've had to break through the barrier of the hermeneutic of suspicion to think, I want to be careful about giving people the wrong idea, whether that's another man or another woman. But also, I've got to be aware that I need friendships with men and women, and sometimes it might get messy either with them, or it might get messy in people looking in, but I can't allow the hermeneutic of suspicion or the potential messiness stop me from building friendships that are good for me and good for other people. It's just really important to say that.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think that's why it's so important that people like you, Ed, and other church leaders preach and teach about what healthy friendship it looks like. Because, again, we've allowed the whole sexuality thing to completely dominate the church discourse about relationships. And I think just providing a positive view of friendships in the scriptures, of friendship examples of friendships. I think just being able to celebrate friendships within the church community and point out how rich and significant and life-changing they are, that's a very important part of helping to counter the hermeneutic of suspicion.
What about strengthening friendships? So we've talked about often having to take the initiative to get together, to get to know somebody at an initial level. Any wisdom on how we then build friendships and strengthen them? Maybe even actually amongst peers rather than just intergenerational. Any wisdom on strengthening friendships?
Well, I remember Rico Tice, a very good friend of mine, once saying that love is a 4-letter word spelt Time. And that is so profound, because it's so true. If we really want a deep love to grow between two people, the only way it can happen is by choosing to spend time. And of course, that's a matter of priorities. How important is this compared to all the other things on our agenda? How important is this compared to our various goals and work pressures and going through the latest social media posts and then Netflix and goodness knows what? And I know the theory. The theory is these friendships matter so much that I've got to get off my backside and reach out to that person and say, I haven't heard anything from you for a bit. Can we meet up? Can we meet face to face? Would you like to come and do something with me? So I think it is. It has to be intentional, and that's why I think it's a mistake to want to have 50 superficial friends. It's much better to have 5 significant relationships than 50 superficial ones, and even maybe 1 or 2, and therefore, praying and choosing and saying by God, under God, what are the friendships that I really want to nurture, and then what am I going to do practically to spend time, to invest. And just, again, it's asking those questions, how can I pray for you? I was thinking about you when this happened, and I know these are issues for you. And again, making ourselves vulnerable. Can you pray about this? This is an issue which is really important for me. I'd love to be able to talk to you about it.
And I do think vulnerability is, time and vulnerability would be my answers, to that, which you just wonderfully brought out. And I think perhaps, particularly sometimes for same-sex attracted people, potentially some of those who've perhaps been, as the culture put it, in the closet for too long, is we got very used to being self-protective, very used to not being open and honest about some of the ups and downs of life. That has become a habit. And I've certainly found that, as somebody that I don't think told anybody about my struggles with sexuality until my late 20s, I've become very good at being self-protective, and my instinct is not to tell people how I'm doing. And I really upset, I upset some of my friends even now, because I'll have had a hard week, or I'll be going through a hard time, but they only hear about it afterwards. And some of them, I was a few weekends I was back. I just had some. In fact, it was after the last time I saw John. I had a horrible bug, and I just had, classic weekend at home, feeling miserable. And I texted some friends on the Monday or Tuesday and just said that, and they said, "Why did you not text us on the Saturday? Why have you had a whole, And I said, yeah, and it was a really good question. I felt nicely rebuked by them.
I mean, I think I would probably want to chip in that I guess it's good if friendships have fun occasionally. And so, I mean, it's funny, I was sort of reflecting, all my friendships revolve around sarcasm, essentially. So every single one of my friends are sarcastic. Actually, somebody did suggest they weren't sarcastic until they met me, but actually sort of that sort of gentle, or sometimes not so gentle, teasing of each other is actually very much for me part of friendship. But it's always got that combination. As I look at all my friendships, there's that fun, that banter, that sarcasm, and an ability to go serious as well. And actually, but they're always there, actually, those two elements in friendships that have lasted for me.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I and certainly the friendship, the laughter and the sharing of silly jokes and so on. Particularly as a married man, I know there's a whole lot of humour that's completely lost on my wife. But with my male friends, we can roar together. Having said that, I do think male banter can be a real put off. It's a way of, let's just turn it into a joke. It's all a bit of, and so I think there's a risk there. I can see some of my male friends who so we just naturally get into this banter as soon as we meet, but it becomes a bit of a barrier.
And I think it's how you do both, isn't it? So actually that can't just be a way of avoiding getting into anything serious at all. Otherwise, there's actually no depth to it. And so, yeah, I suspect you will always need both of those elements to some extent. John, thank you so much, and would want again to commend to people a book both Ed and I enjoyed, Transforming Friendship. To check that out at all your best local bookstores and so on. But no, John, thank you so much for being with us. Next episode, we'll be digging into some of the challenges and barriers to friendship that we often face and how we might overcome those. But for now, thanks so much for joining us. Goodbye.